We could start this out with and now, the moment you've all been waiting for. We're getting into Ecclesiastes. So, yeah, exciting, right? Like we started, I think it's like 3 weeks ago now, so we're actually officially getting started. We have a few questions. First of all, these are open-ended questions. I'm not necessarily looking for like a right or wrong answer. I'm definitely not looking for the super spiritual answer, just for the true answer. If your true answer is a spiritual answer, then hey, good for you. I won't be able to tell. Between you and the Lord, but but don't be afraid to jump in. So let's get started. What are some classic American values? Family. Okay, what else? Freedom. Freedom and independence from what? Authority. Yeah.
Free speech.
A high-paying job. Okay. Free speech. Guns. That's true. That's been the American dream. Tell me what the American dream is, Greg. Excellent. Well, I think we'll move on to the next question with that, because I think that is a fantastic thing to keep in the back of our minds as we go through Ecclesiastes. I think in America, we all have a little bit, although American culture is changing nowadays, but I think we all have that a little bit in the back of our minds. If you work hard enough, you can do what you want to do, or you can be who you want to be. We talked about classic or traditional American values. What are things in our culture today that are valued, that's different, that you can tell just from personal experience? So what are some of modern values? How have values changed? What do people value today? Inclusivity. Okay. Yep. Themselves. I'm sorry. Their image. Yes. Identity. I think that's a very, very big one. What else? Authenticity. Very much. I think that's a very big one. Wealth. Yes. So I bring those up because thinking traditional American values, while our culture is changing, as Americans, we still have some of those in the back of our minds, but it's also important to be aware of what modern values are and to keep those in our minds so we can check ourselves and see what do we value, right? And then we can take an understanding that and understand what the world values, and then we can compare that to Scripture. And I think values and really maybe if I could restate that as things that we pursue in our lives is very prevalent in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's the main theme in the book of Ecclesiastes. So, the world kind of on the same topic, a little nuanced, different question. The world is full of things that promise meaning and fulfillment. What are some of those things? Wealth. Fame. Followers. Followers on TikTok, right? Yeah. Yeah. Entertainment. I think entertainment's a big one. And it's kind of scary if you stop and think about that. We are, as a society, a consumeristic society today. So our world is geared to what can we consume and consuming the best thing, and what can be marketed to us to make us consume more. We're eaters. We're not always thinkers. Anything else? What else promises meaning today? Dopamine. It's true. It's very true. I'm sorry? Mm-hmm. Who you love. Yes. So thinking about all these things that the world, and maybe you have some others in your mind that you're mulling over, but all these things that the world says, hey, if you have this thing, then you will have meaning in your life. Have you ever in your life found yourself pursuing one of those things? I've never pursued fame. I'm just going to put that out there. I'm also lying when I say that. I wanted to be famous. I wanted to have all the followers on social media. That's a large thing I pursued in my life because I thought that would bring meaning. Pursued relationships, thinking if I can just get into a relationship, that will bring true fulfillment and meaning. Now, I'm going to say being in a relationship has been amazing. I don't mean to say that, but is it what brings meaning in my life? I find if I take and put that in that position in my life, I end up feeling empty. So have you ever pursued one of these things? Yeah. Yeah. That was going to be my follow-up question is are we pursuing any of those things today, right now? I was writing down that question and I paused earlier when I was writing it down and just stopped and thought, man, I can point to certain things in my life that I'm pursuing because for one I enjoy them, but for another because I'm thinking that that's gonna bring me some sort of fulfillment in my life when I finally reach the end of that thing. But have you ever pursued something, um, even like very strongly, dedicated a lot of time to it, and finally reached whatever goal you were at and found the end to be a little bit empty? I think one of the well, first before I say that, give me examples. Being right. Yeah. Sometimes you bulldoze somebody else just to be right, and then you look back and see all the damage you've caused. So I say you, inclusive of all of us, right? Yes. Been there, done that. It brought you lots of meaning, right? And fulfillment. No, I find it sometimes I get to the end and I'm like, I just wasted so much time in my life, that I could have been doing something else. Not that it's wrong to play video games, but when we pursue them for fulfillment. Yeah, Alex? So I have an example from work. It's a little kind of specific, but I think applicable. A lot of you know I'm down here for work. A couple big projects I'm working on. We spent like 3 years preparing one of these projects, and the week before we're supposed to start installing it got canceled for purely budgetary reasons. The manager didn't want to have it in his budget. It was all these years of work, all this effort. It was a major thing that me and other people were working on. And at the end of the day, we get to the end and it just doesn't happen. Completely out of our control. Very frustrating. Definitely made me think vanity. Yeah. Yep. Yep. So I'll stop there. But hopefully that's getting those brain juices flowing as we approach the book of Ecclesiastes. Um, to get us to stop and think, what are we pursuing? What are we looking for? Where are we looking for meaning in life? Ecclesiastes, well, Ecclesiastes, Solomon, the wisest man on earth, he looked for meaning and he was able to look for meaning in every place that any person, any individual person can look for it because unlike us, he was the wealthiest man on earth in his day. Not only was he the wealthiest, he was the wisest. And so he went on a lot of different pursuits in his life to try to find this meaning, to try to find this profit that we'll see, or this gain, this benefit in all of his work. And he comes up short over and over again. And Ecclesiastes is Solomon's book where he's looking back over his life as an old man, and he's encouraging his son, these are the things that I pursued, and this is where it led me. So where do we find meaning? Well, he concludes at the end of the book, fear God and keep his commandments. That is the pursuit that will bring meaning. But what that means, we need to fully understand what that means. We need to go through the book section by section. So today we're just going to look at the first 3 verses. If you're not open to Ecclesiastes, go ahead and open there. It's about halfway into your Bible. Will somebody read for me verses 1 through 3, please?
Vanity of vanity, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What advantage does man have in all his work, which he does under the sun?
Thank you. Okay, so verse 1, he begins with the words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Okay, so this is Solomon speaking. He is the king that succeeded David, while there was another son of David that was trying to gain the throne. Solomon was the one to whom it passed. And so Solomon is king in Jerusalem. He calls himself here the preacher. Now, this word, the preacher, is where we get the title for Ecclesiastes. Now, not from the Hebrew form of the word, but from the Greek form of the word. Actually, a lot of our English names for Old Testament books come from the Greek translation of those books and not actually from their Hebrew names. Ecclesiastes is one of them. The word preacher in Hebrew, it's kohelet. It means a leader or a speaker of an assembly. And if you know anything about the meaning of the term church, it's a group of called out ones. It's an assembly. In Greek, the word for church, which is a non-specific word, but it's ecclesia. And so you can hear the similarity between ecclesia and Ecclesiastes. Now, does that mean that the church is here in the Old Testament? No, it's not. It's a generic term for assembly, but that's where we get the name. He is in Ecclesiastes. Solomon assumes this position of somebody who's a teacher, who's in front of a large group of people and who's teaching them about life. The group of people, the audience of the book of Ecclesiastes, primarily is his son, in the same way that Proverbs, he often repeats, to my son, or my son, listen to my words. He often does that throughout Proverbs. Now, we don't get that repeated as much in the book of Ecclesiastes, but if you go all the way to chapter 12, he declares that he's writing to his son. He says, verse 12, he says, and further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making books, many books, there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. So that's his immediate audience, is a father to a son, especially an older father to his son. But I think a broader audience is not just the nation of Israel. I think he's speaking to the nation of Israel and beyond, to humankind. And why do I say this? Well, one, he does not use the term Yahweh at all in the book. Yahweh was the name of God given as his personal name to his nation Israel. That's not used in the book. Rather, the more generic name or term for God, like what we would say God, is used, and that's the term Elohim. That's being used throughout the book. And why is it important that he has such a broad and general audience? Well, one is because look back at chapter 12, verse 13. When he concludes the book, he says this: "Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. Or that can also read, for this applies to every man. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. This, in other words, this book is to you. It doesn't matter what organization you're a part of, what nation you're a part of. You strip back all those titles and you just get down to the basis of what it means to be human and what has God given to every human to pursue. Before we bring in anything else like the church or Israel or fill in the blank, making disciples, evangelism, before we bring that, the base level is fear God and keep his commandments. Once we have that established, then we can say, okay, what are God's commandments to me today? And what does it look like to fear God today? But right now we're backing up from that and we're talking generically. So that's Solomon. Solomon, we need to understand something about Solomon. Solomon was younger when he got put into power, and he felt that that weakness, having so much responsibility at his age. If we look at 1 Kings 3, 1 through 15, we can look at an interaction between Solomon and God. That's very important to our understanding of Ecclesiastes, excuse me. Yes, 1 Kings chapter 3. Would somebody read verses 1 through 15?
Solomon made an alliance with Mary, married to God, brought her to the city of David, of the king's palace, and the temple of the Lord, and the wall around it. People, however, were still sacrificing at the high places. The temple had not yet been built for the name of the Lord. Solomon showed his love for the Lord by walking towards the kingdom, given by his father David, except that he offered sacrifices and burnt incense on the high place. When he began to offer sacrifices, that was the most important high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At evening, the Lord appeared to Solomon during the night in a vision. And God said, ask whatever you want me to do. Solomon answered, you have been great friends to your word to my father David. Because it is faithful to you and righteous, upright in heart. This continued this great kindness and every day. Now, Lord my God, you have made me serve my father David. But I am only a little child and do not know how to carry out my duty. Spirit and fear of people who chose when they will take over our kingdom.
The servant is here among the people who have chosen great people, too numerous to count or number. So give your servant a discerning heart to govern the people and to distinguish between right and wrong. For who is able to govern this great people? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for this. So God said to him, since you have asked for this, and not for long life or wealth for yourself, nor have asked for the death of your enemies, but for discernment in ministering justice, I will do what you have asked. I will give you a wise and discerning heart, so that there will never have been anyone like you, nor will there ever be. Moreover, I will give you what you have not asked for, both wealth and honor, so that in your lifetime you will have no equal among kings. And if you walk in obedience to me, and keep my decrees and commands as David your father did, I will give you a long life. Then Solomon awoke, and he realized the dream. He returned to Jerusalem, stood before the ark of the Lord's covenant, and sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. Then he gave a feast for all his work.
Thank you. Thank you both for reading that. I know it's a little hard to read with all the rain, but I appreciate you doing that. So what's going on here? Well, Solomon goes and sacrifices to the Lord 1,000 sacrifices, and God comes down and asks Solomon, "What do you want? Just ask me, and I'll give it to you." That's a pretty incredible statement. Now, if it were me, I'd probably ask a little bit selfishly. I'd probably ask for the things Solomon didn't ask for, the wealth, the fame. But Solomon asked very humbly, he asked for wisdom to be able to lead the nation of Israel. So God said, okay, I'm going to give you the wisdom you asked for. In fact, I'm going to give you so much wisdom that there's not going to be anybody like you ever in all history before you and in all the future as well. But he also gave Solomon riches and wealth beyond any king in Israel. And so Solomon became a very, very great individual. Before we move on talking about Solomon, I do want to stop and address what is wisdom and what is knowledge. Okay, knowledge is knowing what something is, knowing facts, right? Wisdom is knowing how to apply facts, knowing the proper use of knowledge, how to combine two pieces of knowledge in a profitable way. A good example is knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing you don't put a tomato in a fruit salad. Okay, so that's my go-to way of remembering the difference between those. Solomon was very wise. Now, being very wise, did Solomon act on all of his wisdom? Well, no, we know that he, of course, got many, many wives, and because of that, his heart turned away from the Lord. I believe that Ecclesiastes was written at the end of his life as he looked back at all the mistakes he made and is recording that down for us so that we can learn from his mistakes. But that did not, just knowing what to do or knowing the right thing to do or how to properly apply our knowledge does not mean we're instantly going to apply that. So we have to, if we have wisdom, we have to put it into practice. So Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, knew how to look for meaning in life, knew how to pursue things. And we'll see in chapter 2, he even says in verse 3, he says, I searched in my heart how to gratify my flesh with wine, while guiding my heart with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. So even he tried pursuits that were not the godliest pursuits. He tried those, but still used his wisdom to guide him through that. And he's recording the end of his studies here. Okay, so let's move on. Having considered who Solomon is, let's move on to verse 2. It says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Count 5 times the word vanity is repeated in that verse. Now, before we discuss what vanity is, I want to talk about the importance of this verse, in fact, of this phrase, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Now, as we go throughout the whole book, you're going to see this word vanity, sometimes maybe translated as futility or emptiness, vapor, repeated throughout the book. But this phrase, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, only appears twice in the book. It appears here in chapter 1, verse 2, and then it appears in chapter 12, verse 8. He says, vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. Okay, so why is that important? Well, it's because it acts as bookends for the major content section of the book. He's not going to reach his conclusion until he gets out of the vanity section, out from in between these bookends, and he's standing outside looking back over all that he's covered, then he's going to give us the conclusion to fear God and keep his commandments. One thing I want to talk about, just because he starts this by saying vanity of vanities, all is vanity, and has this big section of the book discussing what is vain, what's futile, what's meaningless, what's difficult to understand, does that mean that everything in the book is being written from a humanistic perspective? The answer to that is no. Sometimes, and we'll see it's very clear that sometimes he is writing from a humanistic perspective. But he also, along the way, a lot of the times he stops and he focuses on wisdom and giving wisdom on how to live this life. And he gives nuggets of truth. And he actually encourages several times throughout the book the enjoyment of life. Now, some of these passages, we're going to come to them and we're going to say, how is he telling me to enjoy life? It sounds like he's encouraging me to live life however I want to and gratify my sinful desires. Well, that's not the case. In fact, we'll see that God wants us to, as if he's given us something in life to enjoy, he wants us to enjoy that, but with him in the picture, with him in our minds, as a gift from him. So we'll see, and those will be the light spots in the book. In fact, this book was actually read publicly in Israel during the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. It was meant to be an encouraging thing to the nation of Israel, not a depressing book. I think we come to this and think it's a depressing book because oftentimes we're pursuing the wrong thing, and this book tells us that we're going to reach a dead end if we're pursuing that thing, and we don't want to wake up and pursue what God wants us to pursue. So what does vanity mean? Well, I've already alluded to it, but the word vanity can have a couple meanings. It can mean vain or meaningless. That's one of its possible meanings. It can mean like a lack of content. The idea of it is breath or vapor. So when you go outside on a cold day and you breathe out and you can see your breath for a minute and then it's gone, that's a concept. It's difficult to grasp, difficult to fully understand, and it's not something that you can take home with you. You can grab a hold of it, right? Life's that. There's a lot of things in life that takes away from our ability to reach our desired end. One of those is death. So we read stories about many, many people pursuing things, and then they die, and then everything that they worked for in their life ended by the time they died. They weren't able to grasp that. They weren't able to fully get a hold of that. Even the most wise person on the planet throughout this book is going to talk about how he used his wisdom, and there were still things that he didn't understand. So that the idea is, again, this idea of brevity, vapor, or meaninglessness. And context will show us exactly what definition is going to be applied here. Quentin, you had a question?
So with the connotation or the idea of like kind of graph and vapor, is that where we see the connotation of utility?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's working for something that you'll never achieve, right? I wrote this down, and I think this is so. Why does he use this statement of vanity to bookend the majority of the book? I think can be stated like this: meaning is an endless pursuit for finite people. Meaning is an endless pursuit for finite people. So that's his statement. So let's enter in. Let's start walking along this foggy seashore with Solomon, and look at verse 3. What does he say in verse 3? He says, "What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun?" He poses this question, which this question right here at the beginning of the book is going to be the driving question that drives everything he talks about in the book. So this is a very, very key verse. because he's going to be trying to answer this question with every section that we get into. How do I know that? Well, one is immediately after asking this question, this is the first thing he says once we enter the vanity section. Two is immediately following this question, he's not asking, it's not one in the list of questions. No, he immediately switches to talk about something else. So that's why I believe that this is a driving question. And I think as we go through, you'll see how everything in the book comes back to this. Okay, so let's understand what this question is saying. He says, "What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun?" This word profit can mean gain, can mean profit, can mean advantage. Then he goes on to say, what profit or what gain has a man in all of his labor? Now, labor is one of, there's a group of probably like 10 to 15 words or concepts that are repeated concepts throughout the entire book. And he comes back to them. This is a very prominent thing in wisdom literature and in Solomon's writings. And James, I think, was a student of Solomon, because James also has this sort of way of talking in his book. But he takes a concept, introduces it from one angle, and then he sets it to the side. Then he brings in a new concept, and then he sets that to the side. Then he takes a third concept and he'll mix it with the first one. And then he'll take this third concept and mix it with the second concept. And he'll rotate throughout these concepts, looking at them from different angles throughout the book, each time talking about something new. But I think that also gives us a picture of what wisdom is. It's taking what we know to be true, right, and looking at it from different angles, combining them into something meaningful, something useful. So that's what he's going to do here. And labor is one of these key phrases. There's many different words he uses to refer to labor, but this concept of labor or toil is what we pursue in life. That's the idea being considered. And all of the things that we put our effort into, that we work for in life, what gain do we have in those things? Now, I want to, before we put all of the details together, we need to consider this last detail, which is this phrase, under the sun. Sometimes he uses the phrase under heaven, but it's referring to the same thing. It's referring to life on this earth. Life from physical birth or from conception to death. That's the life that he's considering. Sometimes he's going to talk about, every once in a while he'll hit on things that happen after death, but they're always used to help build his case for what we should be doing in this life. And that's what he's referring to under the sun here. So putting this together, Yep. It's under the sun is referring to this life. From physical birth to physical death. I know life begins at conception, I'm not saying that, but this is a time when we have input into our life, that we get to pursue things. Okay, so under the sun or under heaven. So what is this driving question? He's asking essentially, in all the things that we try to pursue in life, which one gives us an advantage? Which one gives us some return for our labor, some meaningful return? What pursuit is going to bring us fulfillment? That's what he's asking here. What's the meaningful pursuit? The answer, like we've said several times, comes at the end of the book. But in the meantime, he's going to pursue many, many things. So that is our introduction into the book of Ecclesiastes. Next week, we're going to get into looking at nature and seeing many things. We're going to have an existential crisis along with Solomon by looking at all the things in nature that really they seem like they're doing a lot of work, but they're not accomplishing anything, and use that to reflect on our life and what are the things that we pursue without accomplishing anything. So But I'll leave that for next week. We have some time here. Does anybody have any prayer requests?